O Holy Night is one of my favorite Christmas carols. In fact, that's our theme is taken from this song. A weary world rejoices. You know, I've been asking myself lately, why is this such a weary world at times? We've had some tragic car accidents in our community, Uvalde, Club Q, Ukraine, and the list could go on and on. It is so easy to grow weary. We're all here tonight with different stories, coming from different places. Some of us are here truly celebrating because our life right now, everything's coming up roses. Maybe you just got engaged, or you had a new baby, or your family is all together for the first time in a long time. And I know some of you are here tonight because you're just keeping your grandma happy, and that's what she wants you to do on Christmas Eve, is to come to church. And some of us are here because this is a weary time of life for one reason or another, and we're just hoping for a bit of that Christmas joy. Well, the past few years, to say the least, have been challenging for many of us, and we're hoping for a better new year. Perhaps the line of this song that resonates well with some of us tonight is, "Long lay the world in sin and error pining." Pining. That's a word we don't use much these days. In fact, I actually looked it up to see what some of its definitions are. Perhaps the most common use is a longing, a craving for something. I think of a young person pining over their love interest, longing to be with the person that their heart desires. Another use of the word is one that I think probably fits the definition of this song best. Failing gradually in health or vitality, especially from grief, regret, or longing. Failing gradually from grief, regret, or longing due to sin and error. Sin is one of those religious words that we don't really like too much, but let me give you a pretty good definition of sin to help us understand not only this song, but more importantly, why Christmas is such a big thing. Sin is our human propensity to screw things up. It seems a pretty good description of my life sometimes. In sin and error pining, do you ever have a propensity to screw things up? Times we've all messed up relationships, our health, the times we've even done things to hurt our communities and our planet. But that's not the key line of the song. You're not here this Christmas Eve to hear someone tell you how messed up your life is. This line is actually the gateway to help us realize that we, like everybody else, need some help. On our own, we can't get to the place of the gift of peace that Christmas brings. We can work harder. We can make a long list of how we can improve ourselves. But the truth is, we always fall short. What we need is help. Think about the power and the beauty of this line, "and the soul felt its worth." What an incredible gift for our soul to feel its worth. Now let me ask you a question. I want you to be totally honest with yourself. When have you had that feeling? It's actually what we all want to feel. To know that we are valuable from the deepest recesses of our soul, to know that we have inherent value and worth in this world. There's no shortage of voices and influencers telling us how we're not enough and telling us what will make us worthy. There are voices telling us our worth is based on how successful we are, how well behaved our kids are, how beautiful and good looking we are, how well we pray, what plant-based diet we follow, how well we've managed our 401ks, or how well we've responded to suffering or injustice. You know, the truth is we can never measure up. We could never do enough to earn the very thing our heart and our soul long for. To know that we are loved beyond measure. To know that we belong. To know that our life has purpose. What we actually know is that our soul will never feel its worth as long as we're still striving to earn it. There are a lot of people and industries trying to cash in on our desire to earn our worth. All the self-help books, the TV evangelists, the influencers, all telling us if we just buy what they're selling, we will know our worth. Well, there's actually someone in the Christmas story that seems to understand how our soul actually feels its worth. And that's Mary, the mother of Jesus. she comprehends what qualifies us for God's grace. It isn't our successes, our bank accounts, our grades, our goodness. No, there's only one thing that qualifies us for this gift from God, and it's simply our need for it. Do you get a lot of junk mail at your house? I do. And the most prevalent types of junk mail I seem to get are offers for loans of all kinds: car loans, house loans, debt consolidation loans, school loans. And they try to hook you with the line that you have been pre-approved for their special loan, their special interest rates. But the pre-approval always has an asterisk by it. And the asterisk means there's a catch to it. The loan is based on your approved credit. So even though you're pre-approved, you haven't really been approved, or you haven't really qualified for it yet. So even the pre-approval has conditions. Now, God's grace, it actually comes with a pre-approval. But unlike the junk mail, pre-approval of this gift from God actually is unconditional. I guess you could say that the condition for our pre-approval for God's love, grace, and joy is simply the fact that we need it. And so, since we all need it, we're all pre-approved, no exceptions. And the only thing we have to do is accept it. So when Mary sings of God in the Magnificat, the song of praise, when she finds out that she's going to give birth to Jesus, she didn't say that God looked upon her with favor because she was so awesome, or because she was so successful, or because she had it all together. She didn't say that God looked with favor upon her because of her willingness to fight against injustice. Mary didn't say that God looked with favor on her because she had worked hard on herself and that she finally had become the best version of herself. No, God just looked with favor on her, even in her lowliness, a peasant, unmarried teenage girl. It's all grace. You see, do we see our lowliness, our imperfections, as the opening for God's grace, or do we curse at our imperfections and run from them? Do we live in the shadows of shame because we believe that somehow who we are just isn't enough, and our soul can't feel its worth because we can't believe that we're worthy of this gift of love? Our mess-ups, our failings, the broken places, the weakness, the mistakes, those are God's perfect entry points. And don't kid yourself. We've all got those places in our lives. And it's there that we're able to acknowledge the truth about life. And that's that we all need some help along the way. It's in these places of our life that God does God's very best work. Sometimes we try so hard to be good, self-righteous, or woke that we think we never need to bother God for help. We see turning to God as a weakness. And because, at least on the outside, we don't want anyone to think there are cracks in our armor, that we don't want anyone to think we don't have it all together. We don't want anyone to think that we could need help or grace. There are times in our lives, and there are actually people who actually get this. The people who seem to get this are those who are broken, those who are grieving, those who are suffering from addiction and mental illness, for those with unprocessed trauma, for the poor and the poor spirit, for the incarcerated and all who live in desperate situations where they live with the reality that we're never truly self-sufficient. It's in those times, in those situations, that we come face to face with just how in need of grace we are. Which means, when the weariness and imperfections of our lives knock us to our knees, when we struggle, when we're ashamed of our flaws, the mistakes we keep making, it's actually where the good news and great joy meets us, and our soul can begin to feel its worth. It's where God meets us, Emmanuel, God with us. And it's where we find the rejoicing even in the weariness. So we fall on our knees, both figuratively and literally, perhaps. Fall on our knees before the one who loves us without measure, without concern for pre-existing conditions. Fall on our knees before a God in whose grace we melt and discover that we're totally loved and worthy to be loved. We feel our worth when we finally realize that our weary lives rejoice and that we can come home. We can come home for Christmas. home to the very heart of God, home to where God wants all of us to reside, home. Pastor Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "This is our home tonight, and we're all inside. This is our Bethlehem, where we've hauled the hopes and fears of all our years to lay them in front of a manger. We're here together, the lonely, the joyful, the weary, and the heartened. This is our home for the night. This is the night to break open those hopes and fears, to allow God to be born into them and see what happens next." You know it by heart. How the whole town was clogged with travelers, none of whom was there by choice. The emperor wanted them all counted and taxed, and he could have cared less where they slept. That was their problem, not his. Still, you got to wonder, what happened to Joseph's family? If Bethlehem was his hometown, then why didn't his own people take him in? I don't know. But they didn't. And Joseph and Mary got a stall instead of a room, which maybe wasn't as bad as we sometimes make it out to be, but still not an ideal place to have a baby. With luck, they also got a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow. We know they got a feed trough because that's where they laid their treasure. And that's when the picture we all get to see was taken, right then. Well, the star was still overhead and the angels were still singing in the rafters. But 20 minutes later, what? The hole in heaven had closed up and the only music came from the bar at the inn? One of the cows stepped on a chicken and the resulting racket made the baby cry. And Mary leaned over to pick him up, and Mary started crying too. And when Joseph tried to comfort her, she told him she wanted her mother. If she'd just married a nice boy from Nazareth, she said she would be back home where she belonged instead of competing with the sheep for a place to sleep. And then she said she was sorry, and Joseph said not to think another thing about it, and he meant it too. They both hurt all over, and there was nothing to eat, and it was cold as the dickens. But you know what? God was still there, right in the middle of that imperfect picture. Peace was there, and joy and love, not only in the best of their times, but also especially in the worst of times. Because during those times, there could be no mistake about who was responsible. It's God with us. Tonight, I hope you found your way home, and that you can rejoice, and that your soul feels its worth. Because in the best of times of our life and the worst of times, make no mistake about it, God is with us. And that's worth rejoicing over. So let's rejoice. And together, let's go into the world and be of good courage, rendering no one evil for evil, but holding fast to the good, honoring all of God's children, loving and serving others with the power of God's Spirit. And may the grace of the Christ child be with you and all whom you love this day and even forevermore. Merry Christmas.